Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We are excited to talk about the shifting landscape from social media to social insights, and we have two great panelists here to talk about this changing landscape. So here I'll let Devin Widgesinger take it away.
Thanks, Hillary. Yeah, we're excited to have Andrew Grill, the global managing partner for IBM Social, on with us today, and a friend of mine. And of course, you're probably familiar with Insightful. It's a social insights and optimization platform, and so we're really excited to be able to get this kind of brain power on the call, and hope that you'll enjoy it. But Andrew has had a incredible career, and I'll let him speak to on his own. But he was a CEO of Cred previously, and then obviously leading uh, IBM's social consulting practice, which is really interesting because it showcases the evolution that social has taken from something that you would have an intern do defensively for your company just so you had to be there, to now when you see a company like IBM and Oracle and others now making major investments in this, it's very serious. So, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind giving a brief introduction on yourself, I'm sure the audience would love that.
Yeah, hi Devin, Andrew Grill here. Great to be on the webinar. And you know what? This is a subject that's really close to my heart because way back in 2007, 2008, what I was doing is actually meeting once a week with a bunch of, I'd call them social media geeks. We would meet once a week for coffee at a local pub or a coffee shop, and we would hope that one day clients and companies and brands would take this social stuff seriously. And we were sort of mapping out how we might forge a career there. Now, we all got our wish. And so in 2016, as you say, we've got major brands making major acquisitions. But the reason I moved from 12 years of startup, some of it in the social space with Cred, etc., to IBM was I was kind of sick of playing with social media. I really felt there was something more that we could be doing with it. We could actually embed social and social insights deep inside existing business practices. And so when we're talking today is about moving from social media to social insights is very, very timely because I actually want social and the noisy world of social data to make sense to every single part of a company's departments.
So, you bring that up, and I think that this is a really telling sign because I was actually at a lunch with CocaCola yesterday, and one of the things that somebody said is they said, "Well, social is the internet," and it was a semi-shocking statement. What they said was is that when they explain that to their CEO and others, it's essentially saying more eyeballs are being spent on social, and the backbone is the internet that gets it there. But the reality is that more time is being spent on social. So when they were having discussions, the theme was is that disruption is not coming. It's already here, and we're just trying to catch up to it. So when you think about technologies and solutions, and then people and processes, it's not that we're largely revolutionizing things from a company end. It's really basically that we're just trying to catch up with where the world already is. And if you think about what's been this biggest disruptor, social sits in the very center of it because all of a sudden the eyeballs are not as captivated. If you think about media generally speaking, you started off with the newspaper, then you went to radio, then you went to TV, and then all of a sudden the internet came, and now all of a sudden there's this thing called social. So the reality is that the eyeballs are there, but they're more distracted than ever. They consume data on a device on their phone. They don't have to sit there and wait for a program. They're all of a sudden completely in charge. But because of this, this also happens to be one of the biggest solutions for companies too. And I was wondering, Andrew, if you might talk about, just some of the things that you all are seeing from social data and helping that make sense for brands. And if you kind of agree that it's a disruptor, but also one of the biggest solutions we've ever seen.
It's a huge disruptor, but you know what? If we go back 2,000 years, and there's a guy called Tom Standage who writes for The Economist, and he wrote a book some years ago, Social Media, the First 2,000 Years. And basically his tenet was this whole notion of people talking to each other has been around for a long time. And in the 1600s, there were coffee houses in London where that was the social network. You would go there to pin up notices, you go there to gossip, you go there to find out what was going on. as you mentioned, we've had cinema, TV, radio, newspapers. It's all been very much broadcast one way. And so for 50 years or so, or possibly longer, you've had companies able to say, if I want to get a message out there, I can buy a TV ad, I can buy a radio spot, I can buy something in a newspaper, and it's guaranteed people are going to read it because their attention is only across those three mediums. What's happened now with the internet and with applications like social media on top of that channel, you've now got people able to talk back, and you've now got people able to do different things and spend a lot of time on Facebook on their mobile. So what is happening, and I'm sure in most of the media and brands around the world, they're panicking in one hand because they're being massively disrupted. People aren't watching as much linear television anymore, so you can't insert an ad in there and guarantee they're going to see it. The challenge is, if they're moving to social media, how do I put an ad on social media? And that's, again, almost an oxymoron, because the notion of social is it's collaborative, it's people sharing information. We don't want to see ads. And one of the things we might talk about a bit later on is the notion that ad blocking is going to be the big bogeyman of 2016. But you're right, it's actually a huge opportunity, because if you've got compelling content that is worth sharing, then people will do that. And I do this at conferences. I speak a lot around the world, as you know, and I challenge people. Generally, the people in front of me don't know each other, and I'd always speak before a coffee break. And so I challenge them. I say, at the coffee break, go up to two people having a conversation and see how long it takes for you to be invited to join that conversation. Now, you have to listen to what they're saying. You have to sync up to, well, what can I say that's going to actually add value to that conversation? And only then do you get let in. And I give that as a parallel to brands on social. You can't just send out messages that no one wants to hear. You've got to join the conversation. You've got to be invited to join that conversation, just as you are at the coffee break. So I think while it's a huge opportunity, brands are still in the broadcast mindset, and they need to have an engagement mindset.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think it leads into a couple quotes that we have from some folks from IBM, and I believe you've seen this one, right? A major change is taking place in social media. Leading edge companies are moving from liking to leading. Can you explain that and kind of give a little bit of context of what you think the Alistair right there is actually talking about?
Yeah, well, the companies that are really grasping social and social insights have been doing this for a while, and they've gone beyond liking. They realize that, yeah, if someone likes my post, that's great. In fact, I do this to customers all the time. They come to me saying, Andrew, we just had 100,000 likes on our Facebook page, to which I say, so what? And they go, well, we're not sure. Is that good? Is that bad? I said, how many t-shirts did you sell that day if they're a t-shirt manufacturer? And they can tell me exactly how many they sold. So it's not about, likes, it's actually about sales. I think it's really important. So in terms of leading, just as companies years ago when the internet came around, those that got on early could actually, if they're a small organization, appear bigger than larger organizations, because they could own the voice and own the share of voice. And I think companies that are leading the pack are able to get their thought leadership out there, companies like yours, companies like ours, because they know that content worth sharing has a value. And I think advertising will have less of a value when it's just, I want you to buy my product, versus I know how this can change your life, or how this can make your job easier, and I want to assist you there. And by the way, you might want to invest some time in actually purchasing our product.
I think I saw, maybe it was a tweet from you this week, where it had a picture. It said, likes don't pay the bills, sales do. And was that Newscred's office? Is that right? I could be wrong.
It was yesterday. As I was leaving, I was doing another webinar yesterday, and as I saw that, I thought, this is just a perfect quote. And it was actually pinned up near the sales guys, so they remember that it's not just likes. It's how many widgets you sell. And I was asked the question yesterday as well, what's the ROI of social? It's sales. Mm-hmm. How many widgets have you sold as a result of what you're doing? And social can be a real additive process, but it's harder to measure. And so we shouldn't get fixated on likes and fixated on some of those stats. We should actually work out how we can delight our customers so they buy more stuff from us.
Absolutely. And I think, the next quote is something that comes from yourself, that talks about the market research. And I think, the whole point about this is that we've never found anything, where it goes back to our original slide about how social was the biggest disruptor, but now one of the best providers of data, because you can truly tap, unadulterated human emotion. And I was wondering if you could comment on that particular quote?
Yeah, I don't know how or why I dreamt up this quote probably 3 or 4 years ago. I've been using it ever since, and it's often misquoted. It's important to be read in its context. That is, social media is the best piece of market research you never commissioned, because in one sense it's free, but it is also market research. And when I go into the C-suite, who frankly most of them don't get social, and that's not a criticism, it's just because it is so new and they haven't understood the language of social yet. I say to them, you buy a lot of market research, don't you? Yeah, a lot of market research. We spend millions a year. And do you get real insights from that? Oh, we do. We know what our customers want. We can predict trends. And so when I introduce to them the fact that social media, if it can be tamed, if it can be analyzed in a way that looks and sounds like market research, then you can use it for just that. And I was actually in Australia with one of my clients who was the head of consumer insights for a large Australian organization. And I again said this to him, and the light bulb went off. He went, Andrew, we do all this primary and secondary market research. We look at net promoter score. If you can tell me you can harness social data so it becomes social insight, I might just have another source of data. I might have another way to segment my market based on this, unruly data. So I think, again, if you can pitch that social data, social noise can become insight, the important thing is it can't stand on its own. It's got to be embedded into the market research process, into the product innovation process, into the the research and recruitment process. The whole idea behind this webinar is really, it's all very well to have social media and be doing social, but unless it becomes an integrated part of your business, it will just be a standalone.
That's absolutely right. The interesting part is that when people think about data, they usually start with saying like, well, what's the source? Was there any, almost adulteration of motivation? So if somebody, is being paid to sit in a room, sometimes their answers can get muffled after the X amount of hours that they might be sitting there. And the truth is that if you have an understanding of how people are reacting to your brand, it's different than, if somebody's literally doing a, 500 question survey and saying, hey, do you like new Coke versus not? Social literally is that emotion and response and serendipity that happens that has largely never been able to be harnessed before until now. And so when you think about these points about brand preference, exact characteristics of customers, one of the things that we've actually worked on with some really great brands is the fact of, when you talked about segmentation, Andrew, is saying, hey, we used to only know segmentation as a demographical play as opposed to a characteristic play. So, males 18 to 34, things of that nature. With social, you could say you can do things like micro marketing. It's not males 18 to 34. It's people that are interested in lawnmowers and, interested in Pilates and also interested in your brand. How do you market to those which are very different individuals so you don't lose one versus another? So I think when you talk about data sets and the aspect of guessing, that is really where social can take a lot of that out. But to your point, it has to be embedded. It has to be embraced by the entire organization. But it has the ability to truly provide almost perfect data. As long as your constituents are on social, which we'll talk about that a little bit later, you can truly get unadulterated insights. And I think that, there's another quote that we have coming up that, you've put out that is really interesting about culture in the organization. And I've seen you say this a few times, but I wonder if you could, say it and then state what you mean to the audience.
Well, just on that, just to riff on your last comment. So at IBM, we have a whole cognitive platform called Watson that many people would be aware of. And Watson can do some amazing things. We've actually taught Watson how to understand human linguistics. And so I can actually take a bunch of data, it could be your last 3,000 tweets, it could be a product review, and Watson can analyze that and do what we call personality insight. And what Watson then does is he looks at the different segments. And so are you adventure seeking? Are you authoritative? Are you a sort of strong person? That can, as I said, provide amazing customer segmentation, but there is an issue. You've got to be careful of the creepy factor. With technology these days, with social, we're putting so much out there, brands have to be aware that just because I say I like traveling on a Wednesday and I like sitting on the left-hand side of the plane, if my preferred airline then told me that and I didn't have the context that I knew that they knew that, I might get a bit freaked out. So the challenge is the marketers in the future need to understand where to draw the line with asking permission for data and actually passively being able to access it. I have tweeted probably 40,000 times in the last 9 years. And the other day I actually did a test. I said, could I work out how old I was, my marital status, where I worked, and where I lived from Twitter? And I did that. And I thought, wow, there's some 4 very interesting data points that I can actually get from my tweets. So there is incredible power there, but I think marketers have to be ethical and they have to do things in context so we don't, as consumers, think they're being creepy.
No, I think that's the exact point, and I think you mentioned internally how social has also created cultural shifts, right? So how can you embrace this? How can you get people aligned to it? Because everybody's aligned to market research, everybody's aligned to email marketing, everybody's aligned to TV advertisements. How do you create, alignment to social? I think that involves a multi-touch point process. And I think you even had an example of something for IBM. And IBM is obviously known as a massive company that maybe isn't known for moving very quickly, but I think you have an example that you can share with the audience of internally how social helped IBM change policies literally almost overnight.
Yeah, so this is important to give some context. So this is our internal social network. For the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a very strong internal social network. We run on our own platform called IBM Connections. And we've learned, as the other slide said, your value to an organization isn't what you know, it's what you share. And so when you get, 400, 500,000 people on a regular basis exchanging ideas in a safe environment. So I guarantee everyone listening out there have people that have gripes with the company because we're not perfect. I also bet that there are a bunch of Facebook groups, there are WhatsApp groups where employees are complaining about the organization. Now, you have no access to that. You don't know what's going on. And if your company has a quarterly or a yearly performance review or a employee survey, once a year or once a quarter, you find that people don't like working there. What we've found over the last 5 or 6 years is we've engendered a culture where it's okay to be constructively critical. And in this particular case, there's a young man called Max Black. Max is 25 years old. He's a millennial. He works in one of our New York locations. And last April, he submitted an expense claim for an Uber taxi ride, and it was rejected. Now, being a millennial, what Max did, rather than going to his manager saying, I'm a bit upset about this, that my taxi claim was rejected, he posted a petition on our internal social network. So potentially 400,000 people could see that, and it went slightly viral. Now, because we have a safe environment where people are allowed to be constructively critical, because using analytics, we could see the discussion had happened on the company network, and we could see that New York and Uber were trending. Our CHRO, Diane Gerson, who reports to our CEO, Ginny Rometty, basically saw this, jumped in and posted back to Max going, hi, it's Diane Gerson here. I understand there's been an issue with the policy. I'm going to look into it. The next day it was changed. So here's the power of a 25-year-old millennial who felt empowered to constructively criticize a policy. It allowed senior management to view what was going on the company network, and it was rapidly changed. Now, this isn't going to happen at every organization. When I talk about Max, and I've actually interviewed Max in person and got the story firsthand, I go to a bank or to an airline or to a utility and I say that story. They say, Andrew, that wouldn't happen here because the culture is not ready. And I say to them, well, 5 or 6 years ago, we probably weren't ready either, but we've learned to be a collaborative organization. It isn't just the technology that we had to implement. It's a cultural change. And this is the hardest thing, especially with internal social and getting social into organizations. And I'm often asked, what's next for social? And I think the big what's next for social in 2016 is actually internal social and using it to collaborate and using it to innovate and using it to find the voice of your employees and giving them a voice on social internally and externally.
No, I think the point there is that social should not be linear. It needs to be in multiple areas, and it's the method and means for communication. And if you think about just data, its usage isn't towards the social media department that is to try and come up with better engagement stats. It's not that anymore. It's to take the data to know how to inform things like your Uber policy that got changed overnight because it actually made sense. For an organization that's that large, normally if social wasn't around, that would have probably been something that may or may not have taken 4 or 5 years to potentially reverse. Whereas culturally, people would then be upset that they're having to take taxi cabs instead of Ubers, and there's all of a sudden that kind of backhand, water cooler talk instead of something that they can see that the organization at the top said, "Oh, we didn't know that. Actually, yes, good idea. We're going to change that." And there's no way that a Max Black would have largely been communicating with the C-suite human resources officer, except for social. So data, as long as it's going to multiple places, I think you're absolutely right there. I almost talk to customers of ours today, and I say, sometimes it helps to take the word social out so that your executive doesn't detune himself. Like, oh wait, I don't understand social, or I don't get that. I know it's just something we have to do, blah blah blah. But I'm really jazzed if you said TV ads, and that's something that has to obviously change, and it might be something we as an industry have to start doing better. When you think about the media teams, how do they move out of their departments and use the insights to actually get promoted? One of our jobs is to always talk to our clients and say, how do we showcase what you're doing, so it doesn't live in a silo, such that you have a trajectory at the company that is far better and far faster than if you didn't. And so I think the theme for sure is definitely around how do we move from a domiciled area to an enveloped area that is welcome. And I think you already mentioned that. And I know that. Go ahead.
Well, a couple of points just on that is first of all, when I pitch social, I don't use the word social. I'm like you. In fact, when I was pitching social into a large bank in Australia, I turned up to the meeting to say, I'm not here to talk about social. And my customer looked at his watch and said, I'm in the wrong meeting. No, you're not in the wrong meeting. But if I use words that make sense to you, like customer engagement, or if I'm an airline, I talk about turnaround times, they almost breathe a sigh of relief to say, thank goodness I'm not being bombarded with social terminology. You're talking my language. And the other thing is, I think a lot of companies have actually developed a social switchboard. Now, I can't remember the last time I called a switchboard and had someone answer my call and then direct it, because I've got everyone's direct cell number. But I think what companies are doing is, as you've alluded to, they're basically building these teams where all the data comes into one team, and that one team has to triage that and work out whether that's a customer service call, that is a recruitment opportunity, that's a complaint, that's a product enhancement opportunity. And I think in the future, technology like Watson will actually be at the very front end. Watson will be doing the pre-processing. And then importantly, the right data gets to the right part of the company, because some of those social signals, some of those tweets might be about someone who desperately wants to join the company, but the social switchboard doesn't know how to respond to that. And 3 days later, they send it off to the recruitment team and it's too late. So I want, just as you alluded to there, I want people to move out of the switchboard mentality and have social data federated around the company.
No, that makes perfect sense. And when we talk about, it's not really about the tech, it's about the culture. And I know that there's a couple bullets that you've even mentioned here. Is there anything missing that you think we haven't covered, where we should highlight more about the culture and give specificity to how people can take the data and insights that comes from that? And I was wondering if, like you mentioned a couple things, turnaround time, are there any others that you think would be helpful for the audience to know?
Well, I think, again, this is not simple. You can install a social network, whether it be IBM Connections or Slack or Yammer or whatever. And if I had $1 for every time someone said it hasn't worked, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be on a beach somewhere because I'd be a billionaire. Mm-hmm. But it's about basically changing the way you work. And this is a fundamental shift. And in the from now to 2020, I think you're going to see companies that have a fundamental shift as a result of social data. Not just social data that informs them from the outside world, but in the Max Black story, that is one of hundreds of stories where we've been informed of something that isn't quite working in the organization, because people culturally have been comfortable sharing their pleasure or displeasure. And the data, the social internal data, has then driven to a decision to say, this is not quite right. But it's got to start from the top. And I think it is generational, because generationally, as we said before, your value used to be what you knew, but now it's what you share. And the culture of sharing is not something that comes easily. However, I think as millennials come on board, the oldest millennials are now 30 plus, and they're now married with children. They've got their first or second or third. They're in the mid-management sort of role. I think the office worker, the field worker of the future, will want to be more informed, will want to share. I mean, you think about it, your organization of your size and my organization of my size, how do you find experts? How do you get the right person in front of the right client at the right time? And I am always completely amazed at the talent we have in our organization that is in all parts of the world. And conversely, how do client executives find someone like me buried in London in an organization of 400,000 people to put me in front of a client in Melbourne, Australia, and have the client go, wow, that's amazing. So the tech is one part, but it will really rely on the millennials coming on board, almost accepting that I collaborate socially in my personal life. I expect to do it in my work life, and I won't work for you unless you let me do that. It will also require the senior executives that are there now to go, okay, we've got to be more collaborative. The power of everyone being interconnected is so much more valuable than silos. But that is not easy to do, especially in regulated industries. So I think we've got a battle ahead, but the more companies that are doing it like ours and like yours, I think will really benefit. And then people will see that internal social and the culture shift as a result of the sharing collaborative nature will be great, not just for the business, it'll be great for customers, because if there's a problem, customers get things resolved faster.
Oh, it's interesting because even when we think about, demographics, it's really kind of fun. I heard a statistic. I don't know if it still reigns true, but that one of Facebook's largest growing segment, not their current largest segment, but their fastest growing segments were moms, over 40. And you can just take a look at even some of the age and demographic breakdowns that even people 65 plus, almost half of them are on Facebook, for example, to follow it's like the family album. All of a sudden that's shared faster, more intimately, more regularly. 50 to 64, 63%, and obviously the 18 to 29, it's almost everybody that's part of it. But, I think what's really interesting is the need to really sit there and understand social activity is not being limited to who you think it's predominantly for. The reality is that even if you're internal at a company and you say, hey, well, I largely just have very experienced folks, they wouldn't be interested in internal social collaboration. Well, the reality is that they're doing it externally, and the surprise may be very much on the company. So I think the point there is just simply saying that the data is telling us something different. And as we
and the other thing there is that where we've got people inside the organization that may not think they are that socially active externally, it's like, I'm not going to tweet. We find that inside the organization, they find it's a safe environment and they like to share. So I've seen great examples of people that will never be on Twitter, be one of the best collaborators inside an organization because they feel safe. They know whatever they say is only going to be seen by their peers, not by everyone in the world.
Exactly. Nope, that's a good point. And as we go to this data to insights, the talking about that shift, why you just mentioned, hey, they're not going to tweet, but they are going to view, and that just might be something just as part of folks' personality. So the data will be pure to that. So you still might be saying, hey, I've got data that actually showcases, X, Y, and Z, but it's showing that this person isn't necessarily active. Well, that's a data point, meaning they might not be a talker, but they might be a consumer. And that is something that you should definitely know too. And so, I think of a story that, again, this is one that it's not necessarily a true one. It's one that I've kind of come up with on my own, but it's to illustrate the point. Let's say you're an e-commerce retailer, and you can see characteristic data points, which are insights instead of just raw data, that says, hey, there's a millennial girl, let's say 21, and let's say you're the brand Charlotte Russe, and you sell clothing that's largely geared towards that particular demographic set. The millennial girl is clicking around, she's viewing lots of things, And then let's say you have somebody that comes in that maybe slightly older demographic, let's say 35, and they're clicking one thing, but you understand that the characteristic of them is X, Y, and Z. Well, one path that you might take them down would be wrong. So one path might be for the millennial that they're just looking around stuff because they're on Pinterest and they're pinning things. They have a large social following, but they're never going to the purchase page, or they're never going to the separate action pages other than almost having a voyeur view of that particular site. So the path you might send her down is, hey, how can you share this? We'd love to get your opinion, but creating an ability for her to syndicate that content. But the path you might take to, let's say, maybe the 35-year-old that has the income and is clicking on the purchase is, how can she add to her order? Is she familiar with these other lines that fit that same price range? And the effect that that can have is dramatic because it's catered to who that is. And so just the different insight action pathways we've seen work really well. And I'm wondering if, even in, some of your line of work, Andrew, if those are things you have to tell your clients too, is that different things happen for different types of characters of people.
Well, you know what? I really worry what brands know about me, because my brand touch will generally be my billing address. It might be my date of birth, which I always fake, because unless the government actually needs it, I always fake my online birthday because I don't want people stealing my identity. Mm-hmm. So they've got very imperfect data about me. But as I said, just on Twitter, there are 40,000 tweets out there. And so there's also an opportunity to do data matching, again, to do it in a sensitive way. If a brand was on the phone with me and they said, Mr. Grill, you're on Twitter, aren't you? Yes, I am. Can we have your Twitter name? Because we'd like to be able to, better personalize offers down the track. If I know what they're going to do with it, and I know they're an ethical marketer, I'll give it to them. Mm-hmm. If they then are able to look at the insights that I'm sending out there about things that the brands never asked me, to your point, it may actually give them better insights, one about how to segment me better, how to offer me better. And it also might look at my behavior online, because there's an indication from what I'm doing from my social channels. So I think there's an opportunity in the future to marry up my social footprint with my customer record. And, I often ask brands, in your CRM system, is there even a field for Twitter? And they go, no. Mm-hmm. And again, asking someone actively to provide that, or passively matching that and guessing what their Twitter handle might be, can be very, very powerful if it's used in the right way.
No, that's brilliant. And when you think about this, it's because we are in the age of the customer. No longer are we beholden to anything, whether it be media or hey, I have to be at home at 5 o'clock to watch my show. That just doesn't even occur anymore. So when you think about this customer characteristic data, as you mentioned, and turning it into action, we talk about things that are extremely hyper-targeted, very personal, because, what's funny is that, and maybe I've fallen to the slightly, higher end of that millennial group, but there's almost this expectation that if I tweet at an airline and say, hey, you lost my bags, or if I tweet to American Express, hey, there's a problem, my expectation is actually that happens almost immediately, that they respond back to me, because customer service has now become this, spectator sport, and particularly with the data that they can see on me, matching internal and external to say, hey, this is Devin's social footprint. These are the parties that he's connected to. We look like he's connected to a lot of people that match our target customers. Oh, and by the way, here's, his information that we have internally. We better respond to Devin as fast as possible. And again, you should respond to everybody quickly. But, that social switchboard, making sure those internal insights are connected to those external insights, really transforms the entire customer experience. And I think, Brian Solis talked about this in his, latest book. He talked about, X, it's where, business and design meet, and it's the age of the customer for experience. And I'm assuming you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, the thing with digital is that your last best experience becomes your expectation all the time. So when I stay at a Hilton hotel now, most of the hotels allow me to have a digital key, which means I can register, I can literally go straight to the door, and with my iPhone, I can open the door. So even Hilton hotels that don't have that, I think, well, I'm getting a worse experience. And if I go to another hotel chain that doesn't even offer that, or doesn't allow me to pre-select my room like I can pre-select my airline seat, I'm actually changing my buyer behavior to go with those brands that offer that. Now, I've got to tell you, 10 years ago, when I was traveling from Sydney to London, the hotel chain selection was based on, did they have Wi-Fi? Now, there's not a hotel in the world that doesn't have Wi-Fi now. Most of it's free. Some people charge through the nose for it. But back then, by consideration, I would change brand preference based on that. But now I'm hearing that Hilton does that, so I'm going to move my business to Hilton because it gives me a better experience. That's something that other brands have to look at very closely. But even within the Hilton chain, if one of their properties doesn't offer that, I feel like I've been ripped off because every other property offers that.
I think that's actually very quotable. You know, I believe you said your last best experience, creates that new baseline, and I think that's the expectation. And you're right. You know, one of the things that we run into, Andrew, and I assume you probably do too, is that large organizations, they say, hey, we just don't move that fast. We're too big. The proverbial elephants, dancing. And obviously that stems from that famous book from an IBM chairman. And the reality is that we have also seen some large companies do some pretty amazing things digitally. Just as a couple examples, and I'll get you to chat about this too, is that, Dominos, all of us, and by the way, I have used this. I literally send an emoji on Twitter that tags Domino's, and Domino's immediately comes back to me and says, oh, you're trying to order a pizza, just click this button. And literally the experience is that I honestly hate getting on the phone, calling Domino's or whoever the pizza place might be, and there's a bunch of noise in the background, and then they go, wait, well, okay, you wanted this, let me just make sure. So then all of a sudden there was online ordering. Well, many times, I don't like doing that per se from my phone if I'm in kind of a rush. So all of a sudden, they roll out, hey, do you want tweet to order? And they can remember my favorite ones and so forth too if I've set that up. Again, the last best experience becomes that expectation. So just over the weekend when, I was watching some college basketball, I used that because I was on the run and I just wanted to hurry up and get that. And the same thing here we're seeing with, CocaCola, having this personalized effect. And again, when you think about Coke, obviously one of the largest brands in the world and one of the most well-known, they've moved from just saying, hey, this is about our brand, to this is actually about you as our customer. How do we make you feel at one with our particular brand? And, I'd love to get your opinion on that, Andrew, because you're probably dealing with, massive organizations, and particularly with IBM's maybe previous client roster and current client roster. It's not necessarily known for, SMBs per se. So I imagine that how do you showcase things that they can use that help them be able to transform more immediately? What are some of the tactics and things you can tell the audience to say, hey, if you guys do this, this will actually help your brand move a lot faster because disruption is already here, not coming?
Yeah, well, you quote Lou Gerstner, who was a former chairman of IBM, who wrote the book "Who Said Elephants Can't Dance," and so that's a very apt quote. I think what you're alluding to here with both the Coke example and the Domino's is that they've realised that your preferred channel isn't necessarily online or the phone or in person. Your preferred channel is actually a social channel. So I think brands that realise that people have different preferences and they can actually facilitate that. I mean, not everyone is going to order a pizza by sending an emoji on Twitter. Not everyone is going to do that. But those that do probably going to talk about what a great experience it was. And back to that sign that I saw in the NewsGrid office, likes don't pay the bills, sales do. So make it frictionless for me to order. And back to, how we can make elephants dance. It's about being innovative. I mean, IBM is a very large organization, and having spent 12 years running 6 startups to move to IBM, I thought I would be hamstrung with process. Now, not saying we don't have process, we have it for a great reason. But I actually run my team like a startup, and I recruit people from startups, and I have a management that's very supportive, saying, we want you to disrupt. We want you to disrupt us and disrupt the market with some really innovative ideas. So I think it comes down to actually being able to work in an agile way, not just say that you're agile, but actually do that. And we spend a lot of time with our what we call a design thinking approach to go to clients and explain how we actually develop things and how we're able to do things as a large organization. we've just moved 400,000 people from one email platform to our new cloud-based platform called Verse in a matter of months. That's a massive undertaking. How do we do it? We didn't enforce a waterfall process or typical project management. We ran agile, and we weren't quite sure what defects were going to be next week to the week after, but we just ran as fast as we could with an agile way. So I think if an IBM can do things in an agile way and teach agile, I think companies need to be open to doing that. And it may be that you don't have all of your e-commerce in an agile way, or don't have social ordering for everything. You try and you test and you measure. But back to the point that your preferred channel, and maybe you and I are a bit lazy in that we want to tweet an emoji from the lounge room, but our preferred channel is not a typical channel, so make that available.
That's super helpful, and I think it's great. It's obviously a way that large companies can embrace all of this. And again, yeah, you're absolutely right. Elephants can dance in a lot of ways. And, I think we've got some questions that Hillary's gotten from the audience, so we'd love to be able to get some of those answered with the time that we have remaining. So Hillary, do you want to shoot?
Yes. So if everybody's following the Social Insights hashtag, we've gotten a few questions. The first one is, what do you think will be the next big disruptor in media?
Maybe we'll let Andrew take that one.
Well, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, and I read a lot about ad blocking, and that's not something we can solve, but the reason people are blocking ads is because the ads aren't interesting. And back to what I said at the top of the webcast, for 50 years, we've had very much a broadcast model where brands have been able to literally buy space on your television screen, a 2-minute ad interruption, or a space in a newspaper. I'm not saying that's wrong, and that's how media has been bought and sold for years. But some smart cookie has got to come up with another way to provide me information about a product that is relevant and useful. And as we've been saying throughout the whole webcast, there's now so much more relevant, timely insight out there about individuals, about different likes and wants. There's got to be a better way to pair that. The reason that consumers are starting to block ads is because they're annoying. I run an ad blocker and I don't see ads anymore, and the world hasn't ended. So I think that's going to be a real challenge. What is next for advertising? Is it what we call native advertising, which is just advertising camouflage as advertising? People have tried to get celebrities to endorse things. I think the industry is ready for a shake-up, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is. But I think insight will be a real driver of how better ads get made and served and presented.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. And then another question is, how do you feel social media affects a personal brand versus a company brand? And do you have any advice on how to be great at both?
Well, I think you've got to learn the language of social. What I say in my talks when I present to audiences is that if IBM sent me to Germany for 2 years, I would have to learn German, not just to understand, but also be understood. I think the challenge is a lot of people that make buying decisions don't understand the language of social. I'm not saying for a moment they should jump on Twitter and be tweeting all the time and producing content. But again, if I move to Germany and people are talking, I need to know what they're saying. So I think from a company's point of view, more people that pay the bills and make buying decisions should understand more of the language of social and what people are doing. And that can be as simple as signing up for Twitter. And I'm not suggesting for a moment they then need to go and tweet, but follow Devin, follow me, see how we use it, the language we use. And then those with the buying power go, I get this. And so when someone's coming to you with a large request for funding for something on social or on media, they understand that. But in terms of the personal and the company brand, I've been on social for a long time, so I've kind of worked out what works and what doesn't work on social. But I also have a personal brand. And when I'm on stage for IBM, when I'm tweeting about IBM, I'm putting my personal brand at risk as well as IBM's brand at risk. So we have a thing called the Social Computing Guidelines that actually are our social media policy. They've been crowdsourced over the last 5 or 6 years. They've been changed twice. And they basically say, don't be dumb on social. So I think you need to give people guidelines. You need to give them an example of what looks great on social. And you need to have that personal and corporate sort of view. I mentioned before, our Watson computer can actually look at a personality trait and look at personality insights. And we've done this for companies before where we've actually looked at the Twitter handle of the company. And it's a bit like holding a mirror up and saying, this is what the world thinks of your social footprint. This is what the world thinks you're doing. Are you matching your own brand personality? So I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that. And we're talking before about the notion of millennials thinking that they can just post anything. I've said to a group of millennials on numerous occasions, I'm an employer. If I look at your Facebook page or your LinkedIn page or your Twitter page, and my first impression is you getting drunk on a Friday night, I will not employ you, because I don't want my customers seeing that either. So I think we have to be very careful. And once we post something, it's there forever. And be aware of the value of your personal brand to you personally, as well as the value to the organization.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. The rest of our questions we will take on social media and continue the conversation after the webinar. In addition, please download our ebook to get more information on the CMO and the rise of social insights. Thanks so much for joining us on this webinar, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.